Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. I don't know if you saw what happened the other night with Billie Eilish, but Anthony Blair of the New York Post writes, the Native American tribe that owns the land under Billie Eilish's multi-dollar Los Angeles mansion said celebrities should explicitly reference the tribes if they want to use them as virtue signaling. yeah. The Tongva tribe confirmed the bad guy singer $3 million home does sit on its ancestral land. After the 24-year-old used her Grammy's acceptance speech to rail against ICE and insists that, quote, no one is illegal on stolen land, unquote, the indigenous inhabitants of the Los Angeles basin, known as the First Alenjanos, and said they appreciate Eilish's sentiment, but noted that the performer hasn't contacted them directly and insisted that next time she explicitly reference them. Quote, Eilish has not contacted our tribe directly regarding her property. We do value the instance when public figures provide visibility to the true history of this country, is what a Tongva spokesperson said to the Daily Mail. Quote, it is our hope that in future discussions, the tribe can explicitly be referenced to ensure the public understands that the greater Los Angeles basin remains Gabrielino Tongva territory, the spokesperson added. Well, Eilish was widely mocked, of course, lots and lots of memes for her comments, and she, as she yelled, well, F ICE from the stage while denouncing the U.S. as stolen land. Oh, gee, this stolen land nonsense again? Maybe she should step up and forfeit her Southern California mansion since it is supposedly on stolen land, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis wrote on X, and kind of expressing the sentiment of many people. Quote, any white person who does a public stolen land acknowledgement should immediately give his or her land to Native Americans. Otherwise, they don't mean it. Also, I'm pretty sure they don't mean it, wrote Senator Mike Lee. Another one, a gentle reminder that Billie Eilish, worth $50 million, has given $0 to the original inhabitants of this stolen land. That's what an independent journalist, Manny Marotta, wrote in a post. And let me just pause right here and say a few things before we go much further into this discussion. What we are about to get into can be a very polarizing and emotional topic. I have touched on it several times before and have had some misunderstandings of what I am saying, and people tend to assume the worst about me in when I go to some of these areas. So let's just get a few things clear before going on, can we? Number one, I am not disparaging Native Americans. I approach this conversation with the utmost concern for them as well as our society as a whole. Number two, I do not feel superior to anyone, any particular race, any particular people, any particular people group. I also do not hold any kind of attitude that, I want Native Americans to be more white or anything like that. The Bible tells us that God created all people to be equal. I do not believe, though, that our country has many advantages over other countries. I do believe that to be the case. And we will get into that in just a little bit. Number 3, I come at this topic mostly from a historical perspective, looking in hindsight at what has been happening and trying to learn from history to make better decisions in the future. That's what we should be doing. We should be learning from history. Number 4, I come at this topic with a true heart for people. I have many friends that are Native American, and I do have genuine concern and pray for them quite often. So, with that said, I was at a local school board meeting not that long ago. And immediately after the Pledge of Allegiance, yes, they actually did have a Pledge of Allegiance. But after that Pledge of Allegiance, they went right into a land acknowledgement. Now, for those that don't know what a land acknowledgement is, it usually goes something like this one. On behalf of, and you insert group here type thing, right? I ask that you join me in acknowledging that our, and this is just an example, University of Wisconsin-Madison campus, here on the shores of Wakasikahomick, or Lake Mendota, resides within the sacred homeland of the Huchak people, a place they call Tejob, which means 4 lakes. Our land grant university would not have been established or sustained were it not for the state and federally sponsored settler colonialism that dispossessed and displaced American Indian nations and communities across our state. We pledge to do the hard work of reflection and truth telling so that we can move forward transformative healing. Okay, that's an example of an actual one of these land acknowledgments. So basically, they all are saying that we are on land that we stole from the Native Americans, and we acknowledge that we stole it. But because we don't have any plans to give it back, we are virtue signaling and trying to expunge our white guilt in this fashion, and we hope you will be satisfied and impressed with our gesture. But is this the case? Well, the Native Americans for Sovereignty and Preservation had this as an article, and they said land acknowledgements have become a common practice across various institutions in the United States, intended to recognize the indigenous peoples whose land was stolen. These statements are often seen as a step forward towards action. However, many indigenous leaders and native voices are increasingly calling out these acknowledgments as a waste of time, unquote, and empty speeches, questioning their actual impact and effectiveness. We believe these actions to be the latest form of virtue signaling and continued marginalization. Kevin Grover, a citizen of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma and Undersecretary for Museums and Culture at the Smithsonian Institution, expressed his concerns when saying if it becomes routine, or worse yet, is strictly performative, then it has no meaning at all. It goes in one ear and out the other. Despite the Smithsonian's vast influence, only 1 or 2 of its museums have adopted land acknowledgments. Grover highlighted the brevity of these statements, noting that even the National Museum of the American Indians acknowledgement is only 1 sentence long. CNN reported that indigenous leaders often view land acknowledgments as an empty gesture, a mere token of recognition without any substantial follow-up actions. These acknowledgments, they argue, serve as a way for institutions to feel good about themselves without making any real commitments to indigenous communities. Ronnie Wood, who is a staff writer at The Atlantic, offers a stark critique in saying, quote, "A land acknowledgement is what you give when you have no intention of giving land. It is like a receipt provided by a highway robber, noting all the jewels and gold coins he has stolen." Wood's comparison underscores the hollowness of these gestures when tangible reparative actions do not accompany them. Furthermore, land acknowledgments can, well, unintentionally convey misleading narratives about the history and disposition of the current realities of American Indians and Alaskan Natives. As highlighted in Anthropology News, these acknowledgments often become highly performative, feel good, empty gestures, signaling ideological conformity to a naive, left wing, paint by numbers approach to social justice. That's what they said. This performity can obscure the deeper issues at hand and the need for more meaningful actions. Well, Wes Frank, a historian with a master's in American history from Northwestern University, echoed this statement on Quora, labeling land acknowledgments as rather pointless and dismissing them as a dollop of liberal guilt. Jeff Means, an associate professor of history at the University of Wyoming, also criticized these acknowledgments as potentially disingenuous and condescending. Indigenous scholars and activists are urging for actions that go beyond mere acknowledgments. Summer Wilkie, a Cherokee graduate student at the University of Arkansas, emphasizes that land acknowledgments are not enough. They must be coupled with efforts to support liberal sovereignty and address the ongoing impacts of colonialization. Similarly, Joseph M. Pierce, a Cherokee Nation citizen and an associate professor at Stony Brook University, argues that land acknowledgments without action is an empty gesture, and it's self-serving. Shana Marie Sage, in a piece in HuffPost, questions whether these acknowledgments are simply hollow efforts from people hopping on progressive bandwagons. Her skepticism reflects a broader frustration among Indigenous communities that these gestures are being co-opted for performative purposes rather than leading to genuine change. The growing discontent among Indigenous leaders and Native voices should prompt institutions to reconsider the purpose and impact of their land acknowledgments. Without concrete actions and commitments, these acknowledgments risk becoming little more than a waste of time and empty speeches, a hollow echo of what could have been a meaningful step toward reconciliation. Well, it goes on to say that the Native Americans for Sovereignty and Preservation, the NASP, calls upon institutions to recognize that land acknowledgments are useless and do not reflect Native communities. NASP emphasizes that these statements do not pose any action or responsibility on anyone or any institution. NASP urges, they say, organizations to move beyond empty words and engage in meaningful actions that support real, on-the-ground tribal sovereignty, cultural preservation, and reparative justice. So, obviously, these land acknowledgments are really just, as they put it, empty gestures. So that brings us to the question of why people like, well, Billie Eilish and others think we're on stolen land. I truly believe that much of this is just ignorance of history in particular. If you look back over the history of the world, people have moved and grown and relocated. Countries and governments have risen and fallen over time. Most of the time, this was done through war. Almost never do you see a people group or a country that just says that, they want to give up their sovereignty. I want to give up my power. Almost every time when a society expands into another culture, it is done through war. This has been the history of the world, whether you like it or not. It was no different with the Native Americans. If you look back through history, you will see the exact same thing. In a article by Douglas Bamforth, he's with the University of Colorado at Boulder. He published this in the Encyclopedia of the Great Plains, and he says intertribal warfare was intense throughout the Great Plains during the 1700s and 1800s, and archaeological data indicate that warfare was present prior to this time. Human skeletons from as early as the woodland period, which is like 250 BC to 900 AD, so before and after Christ, show occasional marks of violence, but conflict, well, it intensified during and after the 13th century, by which time farmers were well established in the plains. After 1250, villagers and villages were often destroyed by fire, and human skeletons regularly show marks of violence, scalping, and other mutilations. Warfare was most intense along the Missouri River in the present day Dakotas, where ancestors of the Mandans and the Hittitas, I know I'm pronouncing that wrong, but also the Arikaras were at war with each other, and towns inhabited by as many as 1,000 people were often fortified with ditch and palisade defenses. Excavations at the Crow Creek site and ancestral Arikara town, dated to 1325, revealed the bodies of 486 people, men, women, and children, essentially the town's entire population, in a mass grave. These individuals had been scalped and dismembered, and their bones showed clear evidence of severe malnutrition, suggesting that violence resulted from competition for food, and probably due to local overpopulation, climate deterioration, things like that. Violence among farmers continued from 1500s through the late 1800s. Archaeological data on war among the nomadic plain hunters are few, but some nomads were attacking farmers on the edges of the plains by at least the 1500s. By the 18th century, war was common among the nomads, apparently largely because of conflicts over hunting territories and all kinds of stuff. Prior to the introduction of the European horse and gun, plains warfare took two forms. When equally matched forces confronted each other, warriors sheltered behind large shields and firing arrows, and individual warriors came out from behind these lines to dance and taunt their opponents and things like this. This mode of combat was largely to show the casualties were light, and things like this. But however, sometimes large war parties surprised and utterly destroyed small camps or hamlets, increasing interaction with Europeans from the 18th century on, and changed these patterns dramatically. Massed shield lines could neither stand against mounted warriors nor protect against firearms, and these mode of battle largely disappeared with the introduction of the horses and the guns. Although equally matched mounted war parties sometimes used the old tactics, but early access to horses also allowed some groups, notably the Comanches, to overwhelm and displace neighboring tribes who lack such access. Documentary and archaeological evidence indicate that horses and guns contributed mightily to more destructive modes of plains warfare, most intently among the Missouri River. But raids for horses by small groups of warriors became a primary form of conflict after the 1750s, particularly among the nomadic groups. Horse raiders usually entered enemy camps at night to take horses. You know, they they, they were enclosed by their owners, but these raids would come in and take them. Such raids were dangerous. Raiders were killed, even caught in the act, and successful raiders often achieved high status for doing so. Retaliation between war and status in the plains is similarly evident in the practice of counting coup, in which a living enemy, or sometimes a dead enemy, was touched with the hand of, or a special stick. This act signified ultimate bravery in most plain tribes and gave a warrior great prestige. The prestige attached to stealing horses and to counting coup rather than killing has contributed to the view that plains warfare was a moderately dangerous kind of game driven by individual quests for status rather than real war given by competition for resources and things like this. And this is misleading. Individual warriors sought status and sometimes avoided killing enemies in battle, but destructive high casualty warfare was widespread, and with documented battles involving thousands of warriors and hundreds of fatalities. Other massacres like that at Crow Creek are known from the 18th and 19th centuries, and archaeological and documentary evidence show great changes in tribal territories resulting from war before and after white contact. So, I bring that to you to show that there was war on this continent before European settlers came, and there was obviously war after as well. But then the U.S. government did something that I believe was a mistake. They set up the treaties and reservations instead of unifying everyone together. They decided to segregate Native Americans from the rest of society and basically have quasi countries within our country. Now, if you look at polls today, a 2023 YouGov poll found 60% of Americans believe establishing reservations was wrong. So let's look at this another way, can we? Segregation in the Jim Crow era had profound negative impacts on Black communities, enforcing second-class citizens through legal, social, economic barriers, primarily in the U.S. South, but other places as well, from the late 19th century until the 1960s. Jim Crow laws mandated separation in schools, parks, libraries, transportation, restrooms, and more, creating isolation. That's what it created, isolation. Segregation confined Black Americans to low-wage jobs like, sharecropping and, debt bondage and menial labor, barring access to unions, fair loans, and quality housing. Inferior facilities and restricted geography and mobility, it perpetrated poverty, with Black schools overcrowded and underfunded and hindering, skill development even. Segregation confined Black families to under-resourced neighborhoods, blocking access to jobs, loans, wealth building, things that we've been talking about. Policies like redefining, denied mortgages and federal housing support, leading to overcrowded, low-quality housing and concentrated poverty that hindered, financial stability. This isolation reduced employment prospects, and contributed to ongoing wealth gaps. So we look at Jim Crow, we look at segregation, particularly in the Black South and things. Now let's look at something else. The U.S. reservation system today encompasses about 326 federally recognized Indian reservations, 326, spanning 56.2 million acres, home to 574 sovereign tribes, exercising self-governance under federal trust. While tribes maintain cultural vitality and economic ventures like gaming, and many face persistent poverty, underfunded infrastructure, and health disparities amid sovereignty challenges. Poverty affects over, get this, 50%. I'm going to say that again. Poverty affects over 50% in places like Pine Ridge. It's 80 to 89% unemployment. Per capita income, 8,768. With overcrowding, 16% of tribal areas. Substandard housing, 40% inadequate, and limited jobs fueling cycles of hardship. Water access lags for thousands near infrastructure, yet unable to connect, while federal housing aid falls short with long waits and maintenance issues. Native residents face elevated risks, 177% higher diabetes mortality, 500% tuberculosis, 60% higher infant mortality, and violence, 84% of women affected. Indian Health Services covers only 60% of the needs. Dropout rates hit 30% in high school, twice the national average. And it's tied to underfunded schools and early skill gaps and isolation. So, are you seeing any similarities here between these two situations? Segregation is wrong, and it leads to bad outcomes. Why is it wrong to segregate blacks in this country, but it's desirable to segregate Native Americans? Nobody can answer this. So let's compare the Native American that lives off the reservation with that are on the reservation. Indigenous people living off reservations in the U.S. often experience better social economic outcomes due to greater access to jobs and education and services compared to reservation conditions. Data shows lower poverty and unemployment rates off reservation, though challenges like cultural disconnection persist. Poverty rates for Native Americans are over 6% higher for those on the reservation. So why are those off the reservation doing so much better? Well, in a word, capitalism. Capitalism has driven the United States prosperity through innovation, economic growth, individual incentives in a free market system. Private ownership and competition reward entrepreneurs who develop new products and services, and spurring advancements like railroads and steel production and modern technology and all kinds of stuff. This dynamic has led to clusters of innovation across regions. Everything from Detroit autos to Silicon Valley tech, and it's boosting productivity and global leadership. Our country has become the world leader because of it. U.S. GDP per capita more than doubled over the past 50 years under capitalist principles, with average annual growth around 3 to 4% in key periods, like the post-World War II boom and the 1980s expansion. Free markets enabled rapid industrialization in the 19th century, outpacing Europe, and lifted standards of living through higher incomes and consumer choices. Capitalism shifted workers from farms to higher paying urban jobs, reducing extreme poverty and expanding the middle class via open immigration and minimal regulation, well, at least before 1914. Consumers benefit from quality improvements as firms compete, while individuals retain more earnings for charity and spending and fueling other demands. So, with all of that, we have questions that need to be asked. Was segregating Native Americans to reservations the right thing to do? Would everyone have been better off if they had integrated into society as a whole? My answer to this would be that everyone would have been better, and I say everyone would have been better if we were more united as a society. This does not mean that Native Americans would lose their culture. They can still hold to their traditions and their practices and everything. Our Constitution and Bill of Rights affords all Americans the freedom of religion, the freedom of life, the freedom of liberty, the freedom of pursuit of happiness. What I am saying is that if we were more united and less divided, we would be a stronger society and culture. That's what I'm saying. We are not on stolen land. We are a people that should be moving forward together for the betterment and the good of everyone. I would love to hear what you have to say on the topic. Again, this can be a very hot topic, one that people don't really like to talk about, right? But that's what we do here on the podcast, right? We talk about topics that nobody wants to talk about. And I would love to hear from you. And you can do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. Thank you very much for listening.
This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.